So we're doing a little bit of recap of the endocrine system because it's such a complicated system, and it's a system we really should know when we're practicing yoga. It's really useful for us to know how we impact the functioning of the body and the mind and how we make that connection. And this is, I would say, the crux of how, why yoga is effective and how we can actually influence the body and the mind, and then also a whole lot of conditions in in the human body. So we talked about the endocrine system, right? Does anybody remember some of the organs that are part of the endocrine system? Anybody? Just shout them out.
Pituitary,
Pineal, okay.
Thymus,
Thyroid,
adrenal.
adrenal, okay. Cortex, what else? What's another important one? Pancreas, right? Pancreas, okay. Yeah. And there's one structure that's very important. It's in the brain. Hypothalamus, right? And that's the master. I mean, pituitary is the master gland, but hypothalamus is the master controller of the gland, right? So that's important to know. The hypothalamus is the highest level, and then you have the pituitary that then affects a lot of the endocrine functions. The endocrine functions is basically secretion of different chemicals into the bloodstream that is targeted towards certain organs that allow or open up the gate for that organ to do its work, right? So, oh sorry, I'm swiping the wrong thing. So it's important to know, at least have a good idea. This is a very vast subject and very confusing subject. So you get a bird's eye view from these presentations here, but really for you to explore more, you have to read on your own and try to see what papers are out there, what's the connection, because it's still an evolving field. It's not like this is a fully mature, everybody knows about this information. Every year you will get a few more papers coming out where where they're discovering new connections. And actually in the field of yoga therapy, people are, in the community of yoga therapists, there are people who are, neuroscientists and neuropsychologists and biochemists, right? And a lot of people are doing a lot of research. They're writing grants and getting grant money from NIH and stuff like that to discover these connections. So every time this is by no means the latest, and because things are keep changing in this field. So it's really good to keep an eye out on this and learn about this a little bit. So what are endocrine system? You have endocrine organs, and then you have endocrine glands, and you have exocrine glands. Exocrine glands are actually defined glands that have a passageway, like it's called a duct. They have a duct that leads to something, like the salivary glands. They produce the saliva somewhere, then they have these little pipes that end up opening into the mouth, right? So that is an exocrine gland. And the endocrine glands are ductless glands, and because they don't leave, so it's a very artificial way of looking at it, but nonetheless, it directly, whatever they produce inside the endocrine gland, it goes directly into the bloodstream. That's one of the distinctions. Now again, there are other words, and again, these are, I would not worry too much about these, but I'll just quickly go through these. Autocrine is a hormone secreted by organs, will make changes within the same organ. That's autocrine. Endocrine, so all of these are just words, Latin words, those words, and it kind of gives you a clue on what they do. Endocrine is hormone secreted by an organ. They elicit a response at a different site. So the chemical that they produce is poured into the bloodstream, and then it goes and targets either the adrenal, or it can go to the thyroid, or it can go to the pancreas, and just to go to different organs far away from where they are originated. Exocrine is, again, you have the ducts, you have the glandular ducts like the salivary glands. Then paracrine is something where the organs, the hormones secreted by the organs make a change in the cells around, close to it, in the neighborhood. It's a local effect. Okay, so to recap the structures of the endocrine system, you have the hypothalamus, which is in the brain. It is part of the neurological system, and it is connected to the endocrine system. That is a connection between the neuro system and the endocrine system. The hypothalamus gets lots of input from nerves, and those nerves, and then it starts sending messages to the basically to the pituitary gland. That is the master gland. That is the gland that has a whole lot of hormones that it secretes, and it controls a whole lot of organs that are far away from where the pituitary resides. Then you have the pineal gland, is a small gland inside the it's actually inside the brain, and that has a specific function as far as they know today, and that is supposed to induce sleep. It produces melatonin that helps you go to sleep, and the levels of melatonin rise and fall in the morning. The levels of melatonin come down, so you can wake up. So that part of the circadian rhythm and the whole how the body gets into the sleep and awake cycles. Then you have the thyroid glands. They are right at the throat level, right? You have the thyroid glands, which are butterfly shaped, and there are two of them. Then you have the parathyroid glands, which are 4 small glands which are embedded in the thyroid. So it's physically very close. They do slightly different things, and we'll talk about that. Then you have the thymus, which is at a lower level, and the thymus has to do with, again, there's questions about when does the thymus mature and when does it stop functioning, and so there's some, again, ongoing research that's going on to kind of start clarifying the roles of the thymus gland. But what they think right now is it helps with the immune system. Then you have the liver. Is technically the liver is not considered a part of the exocrine gland system, but it interacts a lot with the excuse me, with the endocrine system. The adrenal glands are the glands that sit on top of the kidneys. Very, very important in helping we'll talk about the HPA axis, and that is a terminology you should know and read about, and we'll talk a little bit more. But that part, the A part of the HPA axis is the adrenal glands. H is the hypothalamus, P is the pituitary. Okay, then you have the pancreas. Kidneys also do produce hormones that affect blood pressure and affect like the whole body. That's why it's included here. Ovary and the testes in the female and the male respectively, and then the placenta has a big role in producing hormones that has to do with labor and delivery and also pregnancy. Okay, so we went through this. So this list really does not have the liver as one of it, because liver plays a big part in this whole thing. So the nervous system versus endocrine system, what is the difference? So one difference is, now the endocrine system is a system that is supposed to work to maintain homeostasis. Anybody know what's homeostasis?
Temperature regulation in the body.
Okay, that's one part. Anything else?
Even the salts.
Electrolyte imbalance. So yeah, homeostasis is like the base level to get everything back to normal. It's a normal state. So the endocrine system has this feedback mechanism, and it has sensors that says, okay, there's too much calcium, let's bring the calcium down. There's too much calcium in the blood, something's going on, let's bring it down. There's too much of something else, let's bring it down. So that maintains the blood pressure, it maintains the body temperature, everything. So if the body temperature is too high, endocrine system senses that and sends messages, and somehow that comes back to normal, right? And then you have the sweating mechanism is triggered if you're having fever or something, and that is all again the attempt of the body to bring back the temperature to normal. And now the nervous system also does this. The nervous system is also takes a part in play in homeostasis, in trying to get the body back to normal. Somebody has fever, it has to come back to normal. High blood pressure, there's always some stresses going on. Every time you're trying to bring, the goal is the body has to come back to normal functioning. So the difference again is nervous system acts locally and acts very quickly. It is immediate. Once the impulse, the nervous system sends an electrical impulse to an organ to do something, it acts right away and you see the effect right away. For the endocrine system, it goes far away and it takes a longer time to act, and it lasts longer. It's a more longer time. Okay. However, there is a connection between the endocrine and the nervous system. Ultimately, the endocrine system has a lot of control from the nervous system. It's the nervous system that says, okay, there's something going on. In fact, they both talk to each other and adjust each other and send out impulses send out either the chemical messages or the electrical messages. Basically, that's what it is. The nervous system sends out messages. They are electrical messages. The endocrine system sends out messages that are chemical messages. Okay? And the electrical messages, they act right away. The chemical messages can go longer distances and take a little bit of a longer time. So, again, how do hormones help in homeostasis, right? What are hormones? Hormones are the chemicals that are secreted by the endocrine glands, right? There are all kinds of different hormones. So there are three ways of homeostasis using hormones. You have the negative feedback mechanism. So the gland will say that, okay, there's too much calcium in the bloodstream. It will send a message. It will send a message maybe to the pituitary, to the hypothalamus, and they'll say, okay, let's fine tune this. Let's reduce the amount of calcium in the blood. Why? Because calcium can affect how muscles work, calcium can affect blood pressure. I mean, there's so many potassium, calcium, all of these electrolytes that you were talking about, right, affect all kinds of functions. It's the basic way cells get nutrition, cells, things get into the cells, get out of cells. So all of that is a very intricate balanced system. And so there's a negative feedback loop which sends back saying, okay, there's too much of this, calm down, let's bring it down. Then there have the other way that the control happens is one gland A will tell another gland what to do. So very good example of this is the pituitary gland sends out the hormones, secretes hormones to control the thyroid gland. So and then the thyroid gland actually secretes the hormone that actually makes the difference. So that's the gland A is the pituitary. It influences gland B to secrete, and here the thyroid stimulating hormone. Then the thyroid gland will, if there's too little of the thyroxine inside, then the thyroid will produce more of that. Or if there's some problem with the metabolism, that adjustment will happen. And then the third way of controlling homeostasis is by the nervous system. Again, the nerves, they cause the hormone stimulation. Pituitary gland, that lies, that's inside the brain. Over there, it has an anterior lobe, and what the pituitary gland does is, it is the master lobe. It's a small gland, but it has like huge function. Now, what does it do? It has a whole bunch of hormones that it secretes. Okay, so the growth hormone is one of them, and then the thyroid stimulating hormone. This one goes to the thyroid and it tells the thyroid. So when a child is growing, this is pretty active. But even in adults, people have hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism, right? They have different effects, and that can be affected by something going on wrong with the thyroid. Can be But even the pituitary, if it's not doing its job, you're not going to get the thyroid to function properly. Then you have the follicle stimulating hormones for the sex organs, that the pituitary stimulates it doesn't directly stimulate the testosterone and the estrogen, but it stimulates the sex organs to produce those particular hormones that are needed for the development of the secondary sexual characteristics, hairy hair, or development of the breasts, or maturing of the ovary and that kind of stuff. Okay. Then you have the luteinizing and prolactin and oxytocin. These have to do with production of milk for the baby, and so these hormones are also produced by the pituitary. Then you have the ACTH, and that is another very important. The ACTH is part of the HPA axis. I'm going to keep saying HPA axis so you kind of you hear it enough times that you become curious about it. Okay, so and that has to do with stress management. Okay, how do you respond to stress, and if what is the stress response? And we talked, I think if you remember, we talked a lot about the sympathetic system. It's almost like we're saying the same thing, but there is a nice close connection between the sympathetic system, the autonomic nervous system, and this whole endocrine system. And ACTH plays a big role in that. Then there is the antidiuretic hormone, and this one also helps to control how thick or thin the blood is. Okay, so if the blood is too thin, it's too watery, then you end up secreting more blood through the urine, and vice versa. Okay, so disorders, some of the disorders of the pituitary gland, you have excess growth hormone can cause hyperglycemia, and this can actually stimulate the pancreas to secrete more insulin. And the pancreas becomes so crazy secreting too much insulin because the demand is more, that the beta cells of the pancreas can burn out, and that can end up eventually it kind of gets fatigued and gets depleted and ends up in diabetes. Okay, there's Cushing, and this can happen because of dysfunction of the pituitary gland. It can also happen in another way, but this is how the pituitary gland affects diabetes. Cushing's disease is again, Cushing's disease is, again, you have person with Cushing's disease will be a little bit more swollen face and round faced. Okay, and they have problem with growth. They usually will have short stature because there's not enough growth hormone, and they may have glaucoma. Glaucoma is again almost like the eyes are sort of bulging, right? And you can see this in children. So this is another disorder of the pituitary gland. It's an example. The other one is gigantism. This is the opposite. It makes somebody too tall or too big. Then there's diabetes insipidus. Again, this is a similar mechanism where I'm not sure which hormone affects this one, but it can cause, but the pituitary is responsible for this. Then you have the ACTH, adenocorticotropic hormone, and this one directly affects the adrenal glands. Then the adrenal gland is responsible for secreting, for example, the stress hormone, cortisol, that makes everything go up, that makes your blood pressure go up, and that is sort of like this, it can trigger like a sympathetic response in the body, right? So these are some of the disorders of the pituitary gland. And then adenoma is a tumor in the pituitary gland which is benign. Hypophysitis is again, anything with itis means inflammation. So hypophysitis is again inflammation of the pituitary gland according to this, due to an autoimmune condition. And what is autoimmunity? Anybody?
The body just thinks everything is your enemy.
Exactly, itself. It attacks itself. And so it does not recognize some of its own body parts. Then there's something called Sheehan's syndrome, where it doesn't produce enough hormone. Thyroid gland. So we'll go to the next one, the thyroid and the parathyroid hormone. The thyroid, it's like a butterfly shaped. It's right under the Adam's apple area. Okay, and there's a connection between the two butterfly parts of it. The lobe, that's the center of the thyroid gland. What does it do? The thyroid gland is involved in regulation of the basal metabolic rate. Anybody? Basal metabolic rate? What is that?
Digestion, energy,
Or use of energy. There's a basal rate at which everything functions. So people can have a high BMI, metabolic rate or low metabolic rate. Based on some conditions have very high, they're more jumpy and they're more like restless and and it's almost like you can think of the kapha and the pitta kind of people. Maybe you can wonder, you can probably correlate the basal metabolic rate with such people. Then it has to do with the bone growth and the mental development of children. The thyroid is very, very important in children. In anybody growing, it's important in everybody though, because it really affects people going to menopause pretty, a lot, and it does affect people, older people, and it starts getting depleted. So then there's carbohydrate, fat, and enzyme metabolism. So it has to do with metabolism. It has to do with how the body burns, produces energy, how it burns carbohydrates or fats, and how efficient that system is to produce energy. And we need energy for everything in the body, right? All cell functions, for the liver to function, for the heart to function, there's a basic level of energy needed for all of that system to just work properly. Secretion of digestive juices and for gastrointestinal motility. So it helps with regulating the peristalsis movement of the GI system and also the secretion. So there's not too much acid and for digestion and stuff like that. And of course it also, because it's also connected with the basal metabolic rate, that also affects the excitability of the heart, of the nervous system, and vasodilation. What is vasodilation? Anybody?
blood vessels.
Open up.
Everything open.
Yeah, at the capillary level, at the smaller level. So it floods the cells, right? So disorders of the thyroid gland, you can get the hypothyroidism, which is there's not enough secretion of the thyroid hormones, and this can cause lethargy and cold. People with hypothyroidism sometimes have to take a supplement, and it can develop with aging sometimes in people. It can cause weight gain. Okay, and then there's a deficiency of iodine in the diet can cause hypothyroidism. Then there's this condition called Hashimoto's disease, and that is a disorder of the thyroid gland. It's an autoimmune disorder where the thyroid gland attacks itself. It gets, there's inflammation in the thyroid gland that affects the production of its hormones. Hyperthyroidism is oversecretion. It's overactive, and this causes a lot of sweating, irritability, restlessness. It can cause high blood pressure, and there's a condition called Graves' disease that can cause,
I have a question. Some people have all the time cold hands. Hands are cold.
Yeah.
Is that
Sweating also. Sudden sweating also.
So it could be a thyroid condition, but there are some other conditions that can also cause cold hands and feet. There's like something called Raynaud's disease, and so
disease actually?
there's a condition, yeah. So there are different reasons for that, but this could be one of them. That the thyroid, because if it doesn't cause vasodilation, then at the end the blood supply is not very good and it feels cold, right? then you can have thyroid nodules and there's thyroid cancer. Let's go to the thymus gland. Thymus gland is where the two lungs meet. There's the thymus gland over there, and so this is called a lymphoid organ. So I guess it's made of lymph tissues that produces T cells for the immune system. So it helps the body build up immunity, and it's most active during the neonatal period, okay, and in the pre-adolescent period. And then after that, the gland apparently atrophies, and it's replaced mostly by some fat tissues, but there are some residual T lymphopoiesis. So some amount of the T cells, I guess, production still happens, but it's a very low level. So again, I don't know how much is known about the thymus gland that much. So I'm sure they're, I'm sure they're doing more research into this. But so far, what we know is it kind of shuts down. Most of it shuts down at adults at puberty. Adrenal glands are two glands that sit on the top of each kidney, and these are endocrine glands that produce a whole bunch of hormones, and that includes adrenaline and the steroids. So the body produces its own steroids. This is a big part of the steroid produced by the adrenal glands, the adrenal cortex, and wait a minute, where am I? Okay, so so over here for the adrenal glands, it has an outer cortex and an inner medulla. So it has an outer ring like of certain types of cells, and the inside cells are slightly different. See, the cortex is the outside part and the medulla is the inside part, and they produce different hormones. Okay, and the corticosteroids regulate metabolism, okay, and they regulate renal function, and they regulate muscle tone. The aldosterone, that's another secretion of the adrenal gland. It regulates the sodium and potassium ion concentration in the urine, sweat, and saliva. So it helps to, in a way, help to regulate high blood pressure or blood pressure. Then the epinephrine and norepinephrine help to regulate homeostasis during stress. So when you're stressed, your heart beats faster, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, you sweat, all those things happen. But as soon as that stressor, whatever has caused the stress, is gone, you're supposed to go back to normal, right? Everything has to reverse, and you have to go back, and that's what happens with this. The epinephrine levels are regulated accordingly to reduce that response, and everything calms down and goes back to normal. So disorders of the adrenal gland, you can get an aldosterone imbalance. So what this can do is now potassium is very important for the heart function, and it's also important for muscle function. Heart is a muscle. Basically, the heart is a big muscular pump with cavities in it, and the muscles contract and they squeeze that blood out with force.
But nervous system.
What about?
Potassium does impact nervous system.
It does too. Yeah. But this is a very important part of the thing. So if there's an aldosterone imbalance, then it can cause potassium depletion, and it can cause either depletion or the opposite, right? And then it can lead to cardiac toxicity, and it can affect the heart rate, the rhythm of the heart, can cause heart failure. Cortisone deficiency can
Can I ask
cause
a quick
sodium
question?
balance. Yeah.
So while we are on the topic of potassium, so sometimes in a yoga class people have muscle cramps, and I have heard that one of the reasons is because of the potassium levels. Maybe they are more prone to cramps, either when the potassium is too low or too high, I forget. Is there any truth to that, or
It could be, but cramps can be for different reasons too. You have neurogenic claudication. There's something called claudication that can happen because of somehow in that local area the blood supply is not there, a muscle is spasming and it's weak. So yes, dehydration can lead to decreased potassium, and that can lead to muscle cramping. So that's one of the reasons. Then there can be the neurogenic claudication. Remember we talked about that? Somebody who has lumbar stenosis can have this pain in the calf while they're doing something, and you think it's cramping, and it may be neurogenic cramping, or it may be vascular origin. Okay, and even if it's neurogenic, it's mostly because of the nerves. But if it's vascular, it could be potentially also because of dehydration. Somehow that muscle is not getting the nutrients it should be getting, so it can be blocked.
My daughter, she does gymnastics, and then the teacher, the coach, once in a while they remind the students to drink lots of water, otherwise it could cause cramping. And then the other thing they say is have high potassium foods like banana, or oranges, or spinach.
Right.
If you look up the list.
Yeah.
So
And those,
I'm always warning her. She doesn't like bananas. So
like
to eat that.
papaya seeds and stuff, right?
I mean, there are many more common foods
Yeah.
that if you look up,
Right.
this is there. So I need to tell her you eat a banana before you go,
Right,
and
right.
those kind of things.
Yeah.
So it does cause cramping and
Yeah.
gymnasts. I don't know about the other kids.
But usually when somebody is going for a marathon or something, usually that person should be
We have
hydrating previous day.
previous to yeah. Generally, in general, keep
Because-
yourself
Yeah, well
potassium
hydrated.
levels at a good.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And then the corticosterone deficiency can cause sodium imbalance and dehydration. This is what and then it also hampers immunity, and this can cause inflammation, generalized inflammation too. Addison's disease is again the adrenal glands are not producing enough of the hormones. Okay, so pancreas have in between the pancreas there is these little they're called islets of Langerhans, and these islets are the ones that are producing the so the pancreas, let's go back, it's about 6 inches long only, and it's wedged between the stomach and the duodenum, I think, just underneath the stomach, and it is both, the thing about pancreas is it is both an exocrine and an endocrine gland. So the main part of the pancreas, which does not have this islets of Langerhans, actually produces some digestive juices that goes through a duct and empties into the GI system, empties into the small intestine. The alpha cells of the islets of Langerhans they have two types of cells, alpha cells and beta cells. The alpha cells secrete glucagon, okay, and the beta cells secrete insulin. So insulin decreases blood sugar in the blood, the sugar levels in the blood. Glucagon does the opposite, it increases. So they work in coordination with each other to maintain the blood glucose levels. Okay, so insulin facilitates the uptake of glucose into the cells. So how does insulin, it's the same thing, because if there's too much sugar in the blood, if there's too much glucose in the blood, probably the cells are not getting the glucose that they need to burn energy, right? So insulin helps that to drive that blood into the glucose into the cells, so that the cells can work, and that's how it reduces the blood glucose, because it makes that useful.
So the directions to do whether to release glucagon or the insulin comes from hypothalamus or pituitary?
Both. Hypothalamus controls the pituitary then controls everything else.
Everything. So
Yes.
pituitary is everything.
Yes,
Or
but pituitary is mostly uh, uh, the hormonal system. It's the chemically it controls everything. Yeah. So
So
now
none of these act on their own. None of the, like pancreas, they don't act on their
not
own.
really. They because the blood glucose levels are, you know, there are some chemical sensors that say, okay, there's too much glucose in the blood. Then there's a you know, message sent to the pancreas saying, okay, let's ramp up the insulin secretion to reduce the blood sugar, and then or glucagon secretion if it's the opposite way, right? So and the glucagon way, so what the glucagon actually is works, I think, through the liver system. So the insulin promotes, remember all of this is in the blood, so it floats all over the body, and wherever there's a receptor for that particular hormone, that's where it attaches to and it influences that organ that has that particular type of receptor. So insulin also promotes fat synthesis and storage, and glucagon increases the level of glucose in the body, and also during prolonged labor, because you need that glucose also if there's not enough glucose, you need the cells still need to have that. They need to have availability of the glucose. So if there's just generally less glucose in the blood, then the storage sites are stimulated to release glucose through glucagon mechanism.
That's also released during when you sleep, because
I don't know. Because, you know, it depends on what you know, nutrition you've had and what nutrition has gone in, and how the blood sugar increases when you take sugar, right? Or when you take carbohydrates. That gets ultimately becomes glucose. That's how there is the blood sugar. And then when there's too much, then that gets stored. And then that storage is released according to the need. So if there's not much need in while you're sleeping, there's a way of maintaining a certain glucose level in the blood. That's part of the homeostasis mechanism. Kidneys again, we know, is a pair of bean-shaped organs, and kidneys about 5 inches long. It's right like behind your back, and the kidneys mainly what they do is they filter the blood and remove the toxins through the urine. There are 3 important hormones that the kidneys also, so they also secrete hormones. There is erythropoietin, calcitriol and renin, and these have a lot to do with maintaining blood pressure. So this is what the kidneys look like. Okay, I'm not going to go through this anatomy. What does erythropoietin do? It is released in response to hypoxia. Hypoxia. What's hypoxia? Anybody? Low oxygen levels, right? Circulating. So it stimulates the red blood cells in the bone marrow. So the bone marrow produces red blood cells. Then, so if somebody has hypoxia, red blood cells are the carriers of oxygen. If there's not enough red blood cells, there's not going to be enough oxygen in the bloodstream. And when the red blood cells go down, maybe in certain kind of conditions have less red blood cells, then the bone marrow is stimulated to produce more red blood cells so that they can carry more oxygen. They're the carriers of oxygen. So for that you need the kidneys produce this erythropoiesis that helps in production of that. Then there's calcitriol, which is a bioactive vitamin D. It's a steroid hormone, and this helps to regulate the levels of calcium and phosphorus. And again, in the mineralization of bone. Bone is not just a supportive structure, it also is a storehouse of minerals. It stores calcium, and a lot of the minerals are stored. So when those minerals are needed to maintain homeostasis, to maintain the electrolyte balance, the bone is the source from which some of these minerals are taken.
Can I just add
Yeah.
something from the yoga point of view? This hypoxia, I mean, it just came to me. If you go back, see low levels of oxygen at the tissue level. stimulates the red blood cell production in the bone marrow, right? Now coming to our pranayama. Pranayama reduces oxygen levels. That's the goal of pranayama when you practice deeper and deeper Kevala Kumbhaka. See, these all facility that exists in the body is never really harnessed too much. If we are constantly hyperventilating, if we are constantly eating, we are never starving, we are never pushing the boundaries, is what I like to call it. So let's say you don't exercise your muscles, then muscles get wasted. This is very simple, everybody understands. But not only that, at the subtlest level, there is all these various functions that exist in the body which we don't exercise enough, and we never teach our body to utilize those. So it's kind of, I quote unquote forgotten, it's not really forgotten, but it's weakened. So that is what would happen if you kind of deliberately went into a awareful hypoxia, so to say.
So it stimulates this system. It tests the system. It's a test of the system is stimulated to produce that. So you're kind of making sure the processes of your body, I guess, are stimulated the way they're supposed to be by reducing your blood levels. So calcitriol is again okay. So this is what we were talking about, the calcium and the phosphorus levels that are stored in the bones, the mineralization of the bones. The kidney produces also renin. This is the primary function of renin is to increase the blood pressure. And by increasing the blood pressure, the perfusion pressure, the processes of osmosis and diffusion have to do with pressure differences between one side and the other side. It could be inside the cell or outside the cell, inside the tissue and outside the tissue. So if the tissue concentration of something is too much, it can diffuse and go to the other side. And osmosis works a different way, right? But similar concept. It has to do with the concentration of a certain chemical on one side where there's an imbalance between the two sides, and the body is always, even a normal system is always looking to maintain homeostasis and make that concentration equal on both sides, right? That's how things move from A to B. And so the renin over here causes, helps in the perfusion pressure. So the perfusion pressure is the same thing. Increasing the pressure in the kidneys can help to filter some things more to go out as urine, right? So angiotensin is synthesized by the kidneys and causes the blood vessels to constrict. When a blood vessel constricts, or it's called vasoconstriction, the blood vessel becomes narrow. That means the volume has reduced. When the volume reduces, the pressure increases because the liquid is the same, right? So when there's less volume, the pressure is increased. So that is vasoconstriction can cause a higher pressure in that area, in that local area. We're not talking the whole body at this point over here. And so the kidneys causes the blood vessels to constrict everywhere, and then it can increase the blood pressure. So somebody who's going to faint, maybe the kidneys will work more to say, okay, I'm not going to make this person pass urine. I'm going to hold the water. I'm going to constrict everything so the blood pressure goes up. So there's more blood that can go to the brain. Maybe, they faint because there's not enough blood going to the brain. So they need to increase the blood pressure in case of low blood pressure. Kidneys play a very important role in this.
So quick question here. So when it causes the blood vessels to constrict,
Yeah.
it's in the arteries or the veins?
It's the vasoconstriction happens more at the capillary level, which is the connection between the arteries and the veins. So it increases that overall tissue pressure. So I think that's what it usually.
So not only at the local level, but even at the overall level also, kidneys help in regulating blood pressure with anti-diuretic.
Yeah. No, what I meant by local level is it holds the water at the local level.
Yeah.
Right, and then by putting this renin in the bloodstream, it causes probably an overall vasoconstriction where somebody needs to increase the blood pressure, because it's very important for the brain to get blood. So that's a priority in the body. The brain has to get blood. It's okay if the digestive system doesn't get blood. It's okay if some other areas don't get blood for a short period of time, but the brain cannot stay without having oxygen, right? Otherwise, that's what controls everything. The pineal gland is a small gland in the back of the brain area. In the third cerebral ventricle, which is a space within the brain, and it is a small endocrine gland, and it's thought to help with the circadian rhythm and the biological clock. When does somebody wake up? When does somebody grow up? So somebody who's jet lagging, the pineal gland is probably really confused, right? When they were working in two different time zones. During sleep, the melatonin level increases tenfold. Okay, and then in the morning it comes down. So it consists of cells called pinealocytes, neuroglia, and ends of sympathy. So here it has sympathetic postganglionic axons. What that means is it has input from the sympathetic system, which is a part of the autonomic nervous system. So here you see a connection between how the autonomic nervous system is controlling the pineal gland and telling it, okay, let's reduce your melatonin, this person needs to wake up now, right? So that's that dance between the neurological control and the endocrine.
So when you are in sympathetic arousal, you cannot sleep. You don't sleep. You don't
Yes.
want to sleep
Yeah.
because you want
So-
to stay alert.
Right. So think of somebody who has insomnia. Maybe the pineal gland is not producing enough melatonin, or that's why doctors prescribe melatonin sometimes to sleep, right? For people who can't sleep at night. And then you have maybe if you get that sympathetic system to calm down, maybe then it will allow this to happen more, and then you'll be able to go to sleep. So you can see the connection between teaching somebody to get that sympathetic system to calm down. In yoga, we can affect the parasympathetic system quite well, and over time with practice, obviously, right? So there you can have a nice effect. You might be able to affect somebody who has insomnia.
One quick question. The melatonin level in your blood, that also goes with the age of the body,
Yeah, I think
certain
so.
age it has more, certain age not more, and also the sleep cycle also goes with that.
Yes, the sleep cycle goes with that, but yeah, so the whole overall aging process everything is affected in the aging process. Everything sort of is a little bit more degenerated, right? So yeah, but I don't know specifically what are the melatonin levels in somebody who's menopausal versus somebody who's in the postmenopausal versus somebody who's young, versus males versus females. I'm sure there may be some studies on that, but I don't know. Again, these are the sex organs you have in the ovary in the female, okay, and then you have the uterus and the placenta during pregnancy, right? So the uterus and placenta during pregnancy need to have certain levels of hormones, need to have nutrition to be delivered to the baby, to keep feeding the baby with nutrition. So the baby has to grow. Baby needs growth hormone, and baby needs all these hormones. It comes from the mom. It goes through the placenta into the baby, and that's how the baby, the baby goes from the zygote level to an actual, to having tissues and organs and heart and everything, and then finally it has to, during delivery, you need some kind of hormones to get that uterus to pump. to contract so that the baby is removed. So again, there's a whole bunch. Then right after that, the baby has to be fed, and there's the prolactin and lactin and oxytocin. Oxytocin happens during delivery, right? That's when the uterus has to contract to give birth. And then after that, so these events release a flood of hormones in the body, in the mom's body. And then the hormones to bring back everything to normal. Okay, at the same time, there has to be production of milk for the baby. So again, the pituitary is again involved in some of those activities to do that. So it's a very complicated system, even with all the sex organs and all that stuff. And in the male, you have the testes, which produce the androgens, estradiol, and the inhibin. I'm not sure what they are, but yeah. And the ovary, estrogen and progesterone are the two common things that we hear a lot about. And then there are the others. So the reproductive glands are called gonads. And the ovaries are again in the pelvic cavities, and they produce inhibin. I'm not sure what inhibin is.
We just listed a whole bunch of things just from Wikipedia. Each of these have long explanations, and
Right.
we don't need to know. That's the bottom line. You have to know the enormity of these glands. That's all.
Yeah.
For that reason, the list
Yeah.
has been given.
Yeah. That they play an important role in regulation of the body functions. And then same as the testes, you have it's a male reproductive gland that produces the sperm and the androgens, and the androgens and testosterone is part of the androgens. So it's when the secondary sexual characteristics are developed during puberty, a lot of these hormones are in play to produce the hair and develop the sexual characteristics of the adult.
FSH, follicle stimulating hormone.
Yeah.
So inhibin and activin, they stimulate and they
Oh.
release.
So there's
the
another
FSH,
activin. Okay.
yeah.
So again, same thing. The gonads, they produce the gametes, the sperm. Gametes are the basic, things that happen when the sperm in the males and the oocytes, the eggs in the females, they unite to form the zygote. And then the zygote then starts, once it takes and it implants, and then the baby starts getting formed, right? And for that baby, it is truly a miracle. For that particular zygote to be implanted in the placenta, all the conditions have to be right. The temperature, the circulation, the homeostasis, everything has to be perfect, and then it has to be implanted at the right time, and then every stage of growth has different hormones coming in, pouring into this developing fetus. It is truly amazing how having a normal child is such a miracle. Having a child is such a miracle. And sometimes that's where during this development, if something goes wrong, there can be some deficit, spina bifida or something like that. Something didn't happen the way it was supposed to happen for whatever reason. I don't know if it was genetic. There are different conditions that happen because the development of the fetus didn't go completely as planned. Right? So that's a huge miracle, right? That's where you have a big miracle that happens. Progesterone is the hormone involved in maintaining the uterus and supporting. So progesterone levels, if they are down in a pregnant woman, it's going to be a problem to hold a baby, right? So people who have miscarriages and stuff, and it can happen. Sometimes people have miscarriages they don't even know they've had, because in a very early stage something didn't jive exactly, didn't match. So progesterone is a very important hormone for this. Again, testosterone is for development and maintenance of the male reproductive system, and there you have the pituitary and the hypothalamus are involved in this. The gonadotropin releasing hormones are released at the pituitary level, and they go all the way down to the ovaries, to the testes, to mature, to get them to mature. You have the follicle stimulating hormone, you have the luteinizing hormone, you have the prolactin, then you have the oxytocin. Then then you have the inhibin, activin, and relaxin. I guess inhibin is inhibits, activin is activate, and relaxin is, I guess, relax. So yeah, I mean the names are out. If you know a little Latin, I think you can be able to read this. Okay, the organs of the secondary endocrine functions. So these are called, I guess, secondary endocrine functions. They're not primarily listed as endocrine glands, but these are actually organs that also have secretory functions, and they secrete, chemicals. I don't know if they are called hormones or they secrete. So this is the heart, the GI system, the liver, the skeleton, the adipose tissue, and also the skin. So, yeah, that's it. Do we have time? Are we doing anything
Yeah,
else?
we do have.
You want to do the HPA?
Yeah.
Is it here?
Let me.
Any questions about this endocrine system? I think our focus is to just, give you a bird's eye view of the importance and what it does and how each of these affect the body, the function of the body, and how I think if you want to learn more, it's a very fascinating subject. Obviously, there's so much more to know and so much more research being done on this. More and more, they're looking at how this system affects diseases, especially chronic diseases, and to know how, as yoga therapists, you can influence this system. This is the system you can really influence. Sure, you can influence a muscle to become, you can influence the physical performance with the with the biomechanics of movement, right? Somebody wants to run, so you can definitely affect that. But that's at a physical level. But it's much deeper than that. That you can affect the physiology of the body, and you can affect the endocrine system.
How the mindfulness practice impacts the endocrine system? Do we have any studies happen?
I think there are a lot of studies that happen about meditation and mindfulness, and it affects, the blood pressure. How does it affect the blood pressure? Something we have to see. There's so many more research studies going on. For example, one of the things that's been shown is they're doing studies on when you do yoga or when you do meditation, does it affect the cortisol levels?
Yes, or the pituitary
Right. Yeah, and the cortisol comes from the adrenal glands, right? And it is part of the HPA axis. The HPA axis is the hypothalamus, pituitary, and the adrenal cortex. It's a very important, it's an interesting phenomenon because that is the pathway that has to do with stress management. That's the pathway that people talk a lot about. It can cause, mental diseases. It can cause physiological conditions. It can cause blood pressure issues. So, cardiac. All of that can be influenced by the HPA axis. So, I guess your question goes into some of the stuff that we'll take a look at, So,
Is it a correct presentation, Ashwini?
Stress
Yes.
and yoga, right?
this is the
Research and science based.
Yes.
Yeah.
this is the first time I'm seeing these slides. I'm mostly going to read.
I just want to, we will all be doing this more as an interactive study group than anything because this is a topic that requires neuro, endo, there is all that specialization now in stress markers and all these, psychoneuroimmunology. It's like upcoming field and whatnot. So I won't put a gun to to Jyoti's head and say do it properly or anything like that. It's a field that we are all exploring, but very important field.
Yeah,
Very
and there's some
important for us
nice
especially.
there's some nice things over here also to know about. So bidirectional means obviously two directions. So there's the top down and bottoms up. So bottoms up is all the input system, right? Is that what it means?
Yes.
Yeah. So input system that is processed in the brain to say, okay, this is an important sensation, this is an important system that contributes, and then based on that input, the brain reacts and comes up with an output system. Output being actual physical action. It can also be meaning high blood pressure. It can mean the blood pressure is also an output. How does the body regulate the body functions, the blood pressure or blood glucose or something? So that's an output. It based on what's being inputted. It's a feedback mechanism. It's a cycle. There's too much blood sugar, something happens, something else happens, then the insulin is secreted, it reduces it. So there you go, you have the top down is the messages coming from the brain to the organs or to the muscles to do some action. And bottoms up is the input going back into the brain saying, okay, this happened, you overcorrected, let's go back, or vice versa, right? Then you have the autonomic and the neuroendocrine pathways. Again, very, very closely connected, the autonomic and the neuroendocrine pathways. And we talked about the pineal gland. That's a very good example because it is an endocrine gland that secretes melatonin, but it gets sympathetic input from the autonomic nervous system that tells it to say, okay, now stop the melatonin, this person needs to wake up. So that's how that circadian rhythm happens, and it cannot happen. You cannot have the pineal gland working by itself. It cannot work without input from the autonomic nervous system, because that's how the rhythm happens. That's how the cycle takes place. The heart rate variability is it's a good term to know. Please look it up, okay? And I think from what I know about it, it is when you breathe in, your heart rate is increased. When you breathe out, your heart rate actually goes down. So the difference between the increase of the heart rate when you breathe in and breathe out, that is called heart rate variability. And they usually use that to determine how active the HPA axis is. Isn't that right?
How responsive your body is to the stress factors also.
Yeah.
Both. Yeah. So just can I give an
Yeah,
analogy for
please.
this? I learned it from B.M. Hegde. He did Dr. B.M. Hegde, if you know, he's a great. You just look up for his YouTubes and stuff. So what he says is, see, if just for inhalation exhalation purposes, when the heart rate is increasing, when you are inhaling, the heart rate goes up. When you are exhaling, heart rate comes down. So the heart rate follows the breath. So that is heart rate. So if you see the graph, right, if this is inhalation and if this is exhalation, just to get you. So now it will be like this. This is how the curve for the heart rate will be. It'll be like constantly there will be bumps, right? Up and down, up and down. So basically what it's trying to do is it's trying to follow, okay, you're inhaling, let me now, so the variability of the heart rate. It's not just heart rate. A heart rate is not a stagnant rate, right? It's just a constant, it's an adaptive heart rate. So for every second, every moment, the heart is adjusting. So this adjustment capacity is the response to the stress factors. Stress factors, when we say, I would like to call it stimulation as opposed to stress factors, because stress seems negative. Anything where the homeostasis has to be maintained, anything where the body has to adjust itself to the breath, even whether you hold the breath or whether you exhale and hold the breath, all these things are stimulants, right, to the homeostasis. So then it says, wait, this person is holding the breath, which means the oxygen levels are going low, then the heart rate goes up. All these things happen so dynamically at momentary response, not even like, okay, wait for some time, let me think about it. No, it happens right away. So this is heart rate variability, adaptability. When that reduces, when the heart rate variability is less, then that means you are not able to cope up with stress. Lot hormonal response, neuroendocrine pathways are messed up. Maybe HPA axis fatigue has happened. You see, that's why we keep on talking about this HPA axis fatigue. So that is the bottom line with respect to heart rate variability. And Dr. B.M. Hegde was saying, if you see a nice curve like this of your heart, something is seriously wrong. It should look like a constant
More
change.
jagged.
Zigzag.
So the other term that you should look up is vagal tone. It's called vagal tone. And I think vagal tone is also measured. The way the doctors measure vagal tone is by measuring heart rate variability. And the way they measure heart rate variability is by doing EKGs. They look at the EKG and they look at how the heart rate, because the EKG measures the way the electrical impulses go from the heart, from the different nodes from the heart to make different parts of the heart work. And that gives them a clue on how variable that is over a period of time, because over a period of time you have breathed in so many times and you have breathed out so many times. That's how they calculate those differences, and they want to see how. So they want to see that bigger gap between the heart rate variability, so that that means when your heart rate can come down in a reasonable way, and it's not always up. Because if it's always up, then the sympathetic system is a little bit more active and you're a little bit more, so again that can interfere with the HPA axis. So HPA axis, heart rate variability, vagal tone, these are good things to look up and try to understand. So mind-body therapies, again the research is not good for, the yoga research is picking up now more than ever. Because earlier, the way Western people did research was they were very controlled studies, right? So they didn't know how to control all the factors and to find out how yoga, for example, can affect. Because everybody does different things. You need a certain sample size, that kind of stuff, right? So usually, a lot of research in the earlier days were like concrete research was done in the lab. With the labs, with rats and mice and hamsters and stuff like that. And that's how they did, even the psychological research, a lot of it was done in labs, right? And then that was generalized to the general population. So now they're finding better ways to do research methodology to say, okay, the reason, there's this group of people who did yoga so many times a day, there's this people who didn't, let's, genetically they're around the same, maybe they're brothers or something, or twins, pairs of twins, they do a lot of research on twins, fraternal versus identical twins, and they see what are the genetic factors. So they try to rule out things. You have your PhD, right? They try to take out all the confounding factors, and finally they narrow it down to say, okay, it must be the yoga that is making the difference, right? So for that there's a big methodology that they use now. But so far it's just a developing field. It's in its infancy, or even less than that, fetal stages. So this is the famous HPA axis, and some people add, I think the thyroid.
I think that's a different axis, HPT.
HPAT.
HPAT.
I think so. Yeah, there may be HPT too. So that's also can be, some people add that. So, it depends on how you look at it. But this is the basic axis. And this is what is the connection between the hypothalamus, the pituitary and the adrenal cortex. And it is actually a feedback loop. It goes in a cycle. So the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland. Okay? So when it stimulates the pituitary gland secretes ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Now this one goes into the bloodstream, travels all the way, and its receptors are found in the adrenal gland, right? So it connects with those receptors, and then it stimulates, the adrenal gland then produces corticosteroid. It is a steroid, actually. Then this becomes cortisol and it enables the body to maintain steady supplies of blood sugar. Okay, because why blood sugar? Because sugar is the bottom line of energy for a cell. That's the bottom line. Basically, in the body, if you don't have sugar, your cells are not going to work, your organs are not going to work. You do need the sugar to reach the end point, which is at the cell level, right? So now, when you have a threat coming, when you have a stressor coming your way, then certain organs, your muscles need to run. You need to run. So, but you don't need to digest food at that time. So the blood is rediverted to your muscles so that you can run and you don't have to worry about digestion at that time, right? So that control of prioritizing what should be happening at that particular stage is part of this cortisol loop. Okay, so adequate and steady blood sugar levels help the person to cope with prolonged stressors and the body can return to normal.
So just to intervene here, remember we talked initially about health, and the definition of health per Yogic lore is where you are in a positive state of well-being and not necessarily any absence of disease and this and that, right? So also we talked about the stress test of the car to know how good the car is. Same thing with individuals also. There is nothing like a binary state of health where you are healthy or you are not healthy. You are basically as healthy as you can be, as healthy as you want to be, that is. So when your system is working well, that is if the liver is able to break down the fats, and if the glycogenesis happens well, and if the bone marrows have enough supply of minerals to give you, and also a good enough way to deposit the minerals back when you are in parasympathetic response, all of that system is intact, then the last bullet here, adequate and steady blood sugar levels required to cope with a prolonged stressor. For example, a marathon runner, right? Steady supply of blood sugar is needed for that person to run for that long. It's not just simply talking very strong muscles, but also look at the amount of time he'll be running. I just want to also, bring one other example here. There is that 1,000-hour run or 1,000-mile run by these Japanese monks. In those days they used to run for 1,000 hours or 1,000 days. I've also heard 1,000 days. They just ran, that's it. No eating, no drinking, no sleeping. Their only job was to run. Just run, keep running. And imagine that long running. I don't know if it was 1,000 miles or 1,000 hours or 1,000 days. One of those. Basically they just run, and half of them or many of them would just die. But that would be okay for them. They would prepare their bodies and their minds and everything for many, many years, and their ultimate goal is to run. And die in the process is also okay. They want to come back and continue again. To reach that ultimate goal of nirvana, their goal is to run. Imagine what all is needed for them to do that, and to take that final step where they know some good, very big chance of that. It's like going to a pilgrimage. In those days they used to go and say, yeah, I might not come back, which is okay with me. That is the same challenge they would take. And that, imagine the preparation with respect to handling stress. No food, no water, no drink, no sleep. And worst, they are running. And they should be in perfect harmony with themselves to be able to do that.
So they've harnessed the whole body physiology to the maximum level. Right? They've made it so efficient, probably at every level, using only less energy to run more, and just being efficient with that, plus so many things. That's pretty amazing.
How is it possible, no food, no water?
You just have to read the article. See, let's not get caught up in those, but the idea is you understand that they have to be absolutely relaxed to be able to do that, right? There is that term Gudakesha, where a person who never sleeps, literally or otherwise also, right? Either a person who is not unawareful at any point, or a person who really doesn't need sleep because he's in a yoga nidra state all the time through the run.
So they've trained their body, I guess, to be the most efficient then with little energy they can go far, and then so whatever energy they have accumulated over the years while they're training, that's being used in a very sparing manner or something like that. So then there is the sympatheto-medullary pathway, and the hypothalamus also activates the adrenal medulla. So before this we were talking about the adrenal cortex. That is what produces the cortisol, the corticosteroid. So the adrenal medulla secretes adrenaline, right? Adrenaline, noradrenaline, and this is the hormone that also does the fight or flight response. That is the sympathetic response. And so the adrenaline creates changes in the body, like high blood pressure. The heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, sweating happens, right? So, and all of these things happen to help you deal with that stress that is happening over there. And once the threat is over, you have to come back, you have to maintain. The body is always wanting to maintain homeostasis, but it has to prioritize what to do based on the situation. So once the threat is over, it has to come back to homeostasis, and then the parasympathetic system takes over to say, okay, now the tiger is gone, calm down. And so that's how the system is supposed to work. It's supposed to be a short-term thing, right? But in today's day and age, we think a tiger's, chasing us all the time. It's, getting the kids ready, doing this, and everybody's in this hurry, and it just keeps that sympathetic tone on all the time, and that can be the cause of a lot of conditions. So what are glucocorticoids and catecholamines? So glucocorticoids are basically, these are like steroid type of hormones that rev up the system. Let's think of it that way, right? They just rev up. But they're supposed to be used judiciously. They're supposed to be used only when there's a threat. Okay, quickly go, pack your stuff, run. There's a fire. You gotta have, if you don't have adrenaline when there's a fire in your house, you're in trouble. You're like, oh, everything's cool. You can't do that. You have to pack your, important things and run. So glucocorticoids are a series of steroid hormones that point to, they have a particular, every hormone has a matching receptor. Okay, you cannot have a round thing in a square peg. It has to match correctly. So the glucocorticoids are part of the feedback mechanism in the immune system, and they help to modulate the immune system, immunity. And when that system is messed up, you get all kinds of immunity related conditions, right? You can get autoimmune conditions when something goes really wrong with this. Now the catecholamines are examples of this is adrenaline and noradrenaline, and this again causes the fight or flight response, and epinephrine and norepinephrine are the other words. And so again, these are the general physiological changes that help the body rev up everything to escape a stressful situation. So bottoms-up pathway is the parallel ascending projections within the spinal cord and brain that produce inflammation, pain. So this one. So basically, you have sensation. A thorn pricks you. You get pain, right? Why do you get pain? How do you get pain? How does your brain know that is pain? Because you have some pain receptors in there that get stimulated. They have a certain speed at which they go. They go quickly. They go through the spinal cord. There's a reflex arc. Remember that? So that, and then you withdraw your hand. However, the pain sensation has to be registered in the brain. So the pain sensation is carried by, there's a spinothalamic tract. Okay? It goes from the spine to the thalamus. The spinothalamic tract takes that information that, hey, there was this thing that poked this person. That sensation is registered in the thalamus. Okay? And then, and the hypothalamus is connected to the thalamus too, and the thalamus does a lot of processing of pain, but it also gets a lot of input from different parts of the brain. The cortex might say, hey, calm down. It's just a one-time thing. don't go crazy about it, right? So there has to be modulating effects on different parts of the brain. So that is the bottoms up pathway. It's called the afferent system, the sensory system that is carrying information about the environment to the brain to be processed. Top down is the output system, where output system is how, so once pain is interpreted, there's some outcome that comes out of it. The body has to decide, the brain has to decide, what do we do about this? Should we freak out? Should we get that heart rate up? Should we do this? Or should we understand what it is and calm down and not be so reactive to it, right? So a lot of the pain symptoms sometimes can come from somebody remembered that I was in this situation and this happened when I was, sometimes that is stored, this whole hypothalamus is storing, it's a big storage thing, and that is suddenly triggered that, oh my god, the same situation happened, I better run. But actually in reality that might not be the same situation, right? So that's the output system, that is the top-down pathways that teach you how to react.
Can I also talk about the yoga and the psychology and the whole thing, right? Because these are very good slides to connect from biological level to the psychological level to the yogic level. You know, that's the idea here. So if you see these pathways, right? Like let's take this top-down pathway right now. She talked about multiple responses. What is this thought? Should I just remove it? The hand, like quick response, reflex, or should we say, hey, it's okay? What is that a conscious, like let's go to psychology now, Savita's talk, where she talked about the Freud's system, right? Id and superego and ego. So is it the response at the superego level, ego level? Like you have not even seconds to respond. Where is it coming from? Sorry?
It's physiological, right?
Yeah, where is it coming from? Id, ego, superego. Ego anyway processes id and superego. Id or superego? Id. Because it's like such a quick thing that you just simply took the hand away. But let's say you are getting a little shot from the doctor. Then where is the response coming from?
Yeah, it changes.
Right? You're not going to quickly take away the hand. So just to bring also these pain symptoms, inflammation and other things, right? When there is pain in the body, now let's say there is no thought, just there is pain. There is a constant pain. The response to pain itself, is it coming from id's, ego, superego? I mean id or superego. Where is the response coming from for a constant pain?
Superego.
One answer is superego.
Could be either.
Could be either. Very good point.
Yeah.
So, what is yoga's role? That's why I'm talking. That is, it says there, right? In their complementary therapies, which is in our case yoga, help to ameliorate pain symptoms. How? Yeah, by massage, by all those other things. That's not what we are talking. Yoga. When we say yoga, we are only talking yoga. Is it by stretching? Is it by, doing all the exercises? Then it is physical therapy. Then we are in Jyoti's lab. So what are we talking here?
It's the tolerance. Each person's tolerance is
Good point. So what is it, again, coming back to psychology now, should it be coming from? Superego or id? We are back in Savita's land now. That's why we are bringing this whole first semester is all about psychology, physical and yoga. Like we are three people here. Superego. So we are now bringing the top-down pathway from the id level, where it's just an unthought, unawareful response pathway, to the awareful response. Oh, it's okay, it's okay. Yeah, it hurts, it's okay. Take it, relax, it's okay. Don't hold further. Don't make it worse by fighting it inside. But all this fighting, everything happens at the id level earlier. So it's not like we are even aware that we are fighting it. So bringing all of that up to the awareness level and then letting go is quite a job for a yoga therapist to bring it to the client. But however, difference between ego and superego, id and superego also has to slowly, vanish, in the sense that this top-down pathway should become our natural id level training. That means even without our deliberate attempt to pay attention to the pain and then respond to it by relaxing, it should happen naturally. That is, our response to pain should be an easy way to just relax and not fight it at the id level, at the subconscious level. So that is where at the vasana level you are cleansing yourself, and that happens naturally, and that is when your pain symptoms, inflammation and other things come down. Otherwise you can't be constantly aware of your pain throughout the day and keep walking and saying, hey, relax, don't worry, it's okay. You can't do that. But that has to become your pathway. That is what we are talking about when we say, we are building that gray matter, where neural pathways are created, new neural pathways are created, and the old ones are removed. So there is a sort of an unlearning and a sort of a learning that happens, so that now at a natural level these top-down pathways and bottom-up pathways are going to be different. Yeah.
That is interestingly, Patanjali says the same thing, the Yoga Sutras. There is one sutra that says, Tajya samskaro anya samskara pratibandhi.
Very nice.
So what yoga does is basically the instinctual samskaras, it gets replaced by awareful samskaras, so that it becomes autopilot.
Awesome. So I like the word autopilot, and I like what he said. So look at this. We connected from all the way from the biological level to psychological level to yoga level to complete ultimate yoga therapy level to the spiritual level.
And think about mindfulness, right? It has to do with mindfulness, being aware, right? And awareness can be at the subconscious. So say you hurt your shoulder and the injury was only here, but your whole upper back is hurting. And then your lower back is hurting. You don't need to have all of that. That's because you're holding yourself and you're going into this whole reflexive tightening of your body. But the moment your body starts, you become an aware individual and you start saying, I hurt here, I can see this, okay. But why is my lower back? I'm overdoing my response. And just the awareness sends that message to the brain, and the brain says, there's no need for the back muscles to be so crazy right now. And they may just allow the back to relax, then everything else relaxes, and then the body says, okay, let me just take care of this part that needs healing. And the self-healing can happen rather than heal the whole body and get into this whole cycle. So even that physiologically makes sense, because that awareness goes to the brain and is processed, and that sensible option of not having this crazy response is then triggered, right?
Excellent. So this was like the crux of yoga therapy and spiritual, connecting all the way through the whole spectrum.
Yeah. So here you have a very, very complicated diagram, but I think what this shows is it shows the hypothalamus, HYP, and the thalamus, okay? And then you have the brain, and then you have a bunch of arrows going from the thalamus to the brain to the cortex, that is going to more of a conscious level, okay, being processed. Then there's another arrow coming back to the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus is getting instructions from the brain saying, hey, do this, do that. Tell the pituitary to, get the cortex to get stimulated, or tell the pituitary to ask the cortex to calm down, whatever they're giving, right? And then you have all of these other responses that happen, the output responses, the GI system and relaxation and all of that. Then you have the cortisol levels. Again, if that has been triggered, it tells the hypothalamus, it tells the brain that the cortisol levels are high. Should we keep it high? Should we reduce it? Then that decision is made, and those. So basically, these are all the crosstalk between the heart and everything else. They're just talking to each other to inhibit inflammation or inhibit spasms, muscle spasms, or something tightening up when it's not needed. So ultimately, to come to a homeostatic, that the goal is to come back to homeostasis, right? So I'm going to go on from here.
Please read these slides.
The early stages of stress. So stress gets the HPA axis activated. This secretes the glucocorticoids, right? Remember, glucocorticoids are those kind of hormones that promotes the sympathetic response, that promotes fight and flight, right? Then it activates the SAM axis that secretes the catecholamines, right? And then you have the immune system is say, okay, now we got to fight this invader that's coming here, and then the immune system is stimulated, okay? Then you have the vagus. The vagus nerve is also is very much, vagus is part of, a big part of the parasympathetic system, right? So the vagus nerve also is secretes the catecholamines. And then again, inflammation, the cytokines are produced. Cytokines are things that are produced during inflammation, and they and then you have to then say, okay, there's too much inflammation. Again, that system has to be rebalanced again. So chronic stress. Now, cortisol resistance can happen with chronic stress. If somebody is stressed once a day or once in a while, it's a great response. But if you're stressed all the time, then this whole system goes crazy, and the cortisol resistance can happen. So inflammation, the pathways to reduce inflammation is inhibited. That means that inflammation is increased, and it may not need to be increased. Then inflammatory cytokines you can then have a negative. What is a negative feedback regulation? Is it can go back and say, there's too much of cortisol, let's reduce it. And then automatically the body can balance itself. And these regulations, however, sometimes the inflammation can just continue. And that's what happens. So this whole axis, this action happens sort of along this axis. The hypothalamus talking to the pituitary talking to the adrenal cortex, and that is triggered during stress to have a response. But if that response is always happening, that pathway gets fatigued. And then your other systems of, the inflammation system is, your body is always in a state of fighting itself. And at some point, it can be the precursor to developing some autoimmune conditions and chronic, blood pressure and heart disease and stuff like that. So the pro-inflammatory, again, same thing. So the cytokines can go through the blood-brain barrier and signals to specific regions of the brain. And again, the vagus nerve. Remember, the vagus nerve is the longest parasympathetic nerve. It travels all the way from vagus number 10, right? That is in the in the brainstem. Or is it in the medulla? I forgot. It's in the brainstem.
Which one?
Vagus nerve.
I don't know.
It comes all the way down, and it gives out branches to all the different organs on the way, to the throat, to the GI system, to the heart. It innervates so many of these organs that have this control over your response to a stressful situation. So that sometimes can get affected. And
We'll be learning the neurotransmitters in the nervous system.
Yeah.
Very interesting subject.
yeah, so it's there's more to the story. Picture abhi baki hai. Okay, so hang in there. It's not the whole story.
So are you seeing that the slides, inflammation and diabetes, inflammation and chronic ailments, inflammation and blah blah blah. Everything comes from this word inflammation. Now they are even saying that the heart attack and all these cholesterol deposit and everything is also related to inflammation in the body. It's very interesting finding.
So
Yeah.
There are now inflammation markers that they are now checking to see how stressed out a person is.
So what is the cytokines and what does it have to do with inflammation again? I don't get that.
Cytokines are the inflammation response markers.
They are the
like-
markers.
They are produced during those inflammation.
Yeah.
response to.
Or stress response produces. I think that's what they use to. I'm not sure if that's what they use to measure So it said, yeah, inflammatory cytokines. So they have different types of cytokines that I guess are released in the body when maybe there's a stress response. And then again, inflammation, and that's what you're saying, cardiac disease. Again, there's congestive heart failure. A lot of these are more chronic conditions that have developed over years, not a one-time thing. And they contribute to plaque formation that irritates the cardiac, the blood vessels, and that causes local inflammation. That causes closing of the blood supply to the thing. You get cardiac disease, and then they need to go through the CABG and stuff like that.
So when you say inflammation and chronic diseases, particular element, like for example, the cardiovascular is related to the heart, inflammation related to the heart.
Yeah. Cardiovascular, heart and blood supply, blood vessels. The vascular, the blood vessels part, yeah. That whole system. Yeah.
So
And-
presence of that cytokine, it's not a good thing? Presence of that cytokine in your
Yeah, well, I thought cytokines were mostly for inflammation, but I guess there are anti-inflammation cytokines too.
Yeah, actually they are
So-
necessary for, they are inflammatory response
Do you
agents.
have a biochemist in this?
So it's not that they are not good. It's just that there are too many of them because you are constantly stressed out.
So they're just floating around, in the brain, and
So
I mean,
if you
in
have
blood.
more of that means you're more stressed.
Yeah.
so they're like the marker. That's how they measure it, I think.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. But
There are too many of those cytokines also. There's nothing like one cytokine.
Yeah.
There are
it's just a
different
general
molecules.
name
Yeah.
for markers, I think, of inflammation, I guess.
Inflammation response. Interleukins is another word they use. There are interleukins that are produced in response to immune and stress
Interest.
triggers.
So yoga and yoga therapy will help bring down the cytokines
Yeah,
in your body.
yeah.
The inflammation is also necessary, so cytokines are good.
Yeah.
Right?
They are all
Inflammation is
Yeah, yeah.
necessary,
Yeah.
but if the body is not
It's
knowing
the
where to
balance.
switch off.
It's the inability, exactly. It's the inability to go back to homeostasis. That's not a homeostatic condition if you're always elevated, right? You've got to come down. So you need the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Both are needed. It's not like you want to completely get rid of sympathetic. You want to have it. If you are in some kind of if there's a robber chasing you, you better run, and your heart rate better go up. You better run if your house is on fire. So you need that. But it has to be judicious use of those responses rather than all the time you're stressed out. And then you can't come back to normal, to baseline. Inflammatory processes.
Another question. Sorry. Can plaque ever be overturned? Can that be removed? Plaque deposits?
Can aging be reversed? Is the question.
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
To some extent, depending on how long you have to live. Everything depends on that. If you had a bad, let's say you are a very good trained yogi, in which case you should not have any of these. But let's say at an early age you developed some mild atherosclerosis, and then you took up yoga, and next 30 years you worked on that. You probably would have zero atherosclerosis at the end of 30 years. But if you developed atherosclerosis at 60, 65, and then you started doing your yoga, and then you started getting there, by the time you catch up with that, age also is catching up. So this is the problem. Can any disease, every disease be reversed in using yoga? Yes. It all depends on how much commitment you have for yoga and mindfulness, and how much, like Patanjali says, which path you have taken. Mrudu Madhya Ati Matratvat. So you, depending on your pace of the practice, sadhana intensity, and then your own age with respect to how long you have, these two.
So again, inflammatory processes contribute to the onset and progression of immune diseases. Also your immunity is also connected to your tendency for getting allergies and then autoimmune diseases and infections. It can, if you have a good immune system, you might be attacked by an infection, a bacterial infection even, but It may not just because you have good immunity, it might not, the result may not be that bad. Right. Inflammation, osteoporosis, again, it may induce osteoporosis by blocking the vitamin D receptors, so to disturb the role of vitamin D in bone formation, right? And activated NFKB, whatever that is, I guess it's a cytokine, promotes osteoclast activity and bone reabsorption. Osteoclasts are part of the bone when they break down, right? And then the bones become thinner, they become less dense because they're becoming softer, bone reabsorption. So all the minerals are getting depleted from the bones, and the bones need that to keep their strength alive. So inflammation can affect bones too. And then aging, it can inhibit the activity of telomerase as part of the DNA chain, right? The end of it, the caps of
Yeah. You know, the chromosomes, right? They have these end chromosomes. By the way, that's another marker they use to see how stressed you are. One can take up your cells of your tissue and look under the microscope, and they will see that the ends of the chromosomes are broken. When they see that, that means you are, let's say at 60 your cells start looking like, at 30 your cells start looking like a 60-year-old. Then there is a problem. That means the chromosomes, by the ends of the chromosomes and how they look, they will say how bad your stress levels are. It affects at the DNA level. Talk about samskara. It goes all the way to the samskara level.
So this is the cardiac vagal activity is an objective physiological marker of stress and homeostasis. So this is again that's a vagal tone I think I was talking about, when they look at the ECG of somebody and they look at the heart rate variability, and based on that variability numbers they can say whether you have high vagal tone or low vagal tone, and they can predict if you're more of a candidate for a heart condition or not.
Doesn't have to be heart condition, but heart rate variability is a stress factor for
stress
anything.
Or stress.
Yeah. If your heart rate variability is not, there are certain ratios that they have. There are lots of devices, even research devices for heart rate variability. They have some really good solid research grade devices for heart rate variability, and that is being used very regularly for research on yoga and stress, or any stress for that matter. Not necessarily yoga, but if they want to find out stress markers, heart rate variability is a device that helps enormously. Yeah.
I have a question regarding autoimmune disease. How much stress is impacting the people who have the autoimmune disease, and any specific yoga practices can be recommended, or just in general?
How much?
See, an autoimmune disease is has different it's just a general term, right? Somebody has autoimmune diseases. There's so much research that still needs to be. Nobody understood autoimmune diseases for the longest time. Now they are only now beginning to see a connection between autoimmunity and the HPA axis. Now they're doing more studies. So that's not so much. So we don't know which came first, right? We don't know which came first. The autoimmune disease came first, or the stress part came first, and then they developed an autoimmune disease. Or, so I guess it depends on, there's so many. You look at lupus, you look at, so what if somebody who's always been doing yoga, but they have the strong gene, I don't know if lupus is genetic, so okay, and they still get lupus, right? So, or multiple sclerosis, or something like that. So,
there are different kind of autoimmune disease, or
yeah.
at different levels of the body? Or?
There's fibromyalgia. There's different autoimmune conditions where there's rheumatoid arthritis. That is also considered like an autoimmune condition, right? So all of them, I think they're still being studied. They don't have a good, right now in Western medicine, they have a really poor answer to them.
Yeah, but yoga has answers for that. That is, in the mind, when you are fighting something, you are thinking there is an enemy out there. Always, right? Can be, that enemy can be your own creation for the most part, because somebody may not totally like you, you know, just in general, that might be a reality. But the response that we give to that is probably way too unrealistic. So we take everything as our enemy, if that is the mentality one has. So the manifestation, according to yogic definition, is the pranic disturbance, the physical or the mental manomaya kosha disturbance, not the physical, the manomaya kosha disturbance then percolates into pranic level, and prana will also respond in the same way, and eventually that pranic response will translate to the physical body, which has to manifest it somehow. Okay, that response is saying, you know, everybody is my enemy. Then something within the body also thinks everything is my enemy. So that is how you can define in yoga, in yogic terms. See, the concept is very different from the way modern psychology looks at it. So, modern anatomy looks at it. So you cannot just really join the two. It's just a way to explain what is happening. So autoimmunity is a confusion between what is mine and what is others. So everything is treated as others, and there is that very shallow and very small me which we are trying to unrealistically protect from a perceived threat in the mind. We are talking purely psychology at this point. When that happens, the body also follows suit and will also take that little me, which is, you know, a non-existent little me. Maybe something in the brain thinks this is me and rest is all, you know, foreign, and then go and attack that and kill it, because if it is foreign, then it has to go away. So that limited concept of self is the cause for autoimmune disorders. So what's the yogic solution for that? Expansion of self, bringing compassion, bringing love, and expansion of self, feeling secure, because everything is you. Where is the question of anybody attacking you? When that concept and visualization and everything is brought in very consciously as a yoga therapy, then slowly these autoimmune conditions, especially things like rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune condition, they have seen phenomenal progress in the healing of rheumatoid arthritis, at least in stopping the progression initially, because rheumatoid arthritis is a dangerous condition. People have very short lifespan also if the rheumatoid arthritis is, they have severe rheumatoid arthritis. So giving them, say, 10 years extension to their life is plenty already. So that's yoga therapy, where you expand the self, remove the fear, the unrealistic fear inside them, and decrease their sensitivity to all the outside foreign things.
So, so there is a way, according to this, that people are being able to now measure, you know, these kind of responses, which is a positive thing for the field of yoga, because as a therapy, because then it can, you know, nowadays people need to prove the effectiveness of anything that somebody's going to pay for or something. So this would be a nice way of proving the efficacy of this approach. So evaluation of the efficacy of mind-body therapies requires objective outcomes, same thing. So there's, you know, people are doing functional mapping nowadays, also EEGs. You know, you're doing your meditation and they take a mapping of your brain to see which part is lighting up, which part is going crazy, and then they might find that slowly, you know, instead of having diffuse activity or everywhere, your thoughts going all over the brain, you can prove that the person who's a seasoned meditator might be able to reduce his brain activity to that particular level. So there's some nice way of, you know, starting to showcase, demonstrate results, that kind of objective results.
And also fMRI, where they might put a person on the machine hooked up, and then give them certain suggestions and even yoga nidra, or even bring those emotions that they have been suffering from, whether it's PTSD, whatever they are, and study what happens when they recall all these negative events versus bringing the positive suggestions and whatnot.
And then the HRV analysis, the heart rate variability. That's another marker that they can use. A combination of these.
I just want to talk about the HRV. We had been to one San Francisco State University professor, Eric Pepper, who does work in biofeedback research and whatnot. So we had a team of youngsters, high school students, who were doing a project on pranayama and the analysis on left brain, right brain. So as part of that, he was the guide. So we had taken our kids to his lab. So he had connected Chinmay, my son, to this little HRV machine, and he asked Chinmay to do Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama, and he was doing, and he saw the whole heart rate variability, and after about 3 or 4 minutes of Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama, he asked him to stop, and then he went over the whole HRV graph, and he said, look, here it is supposed to follow your inhalation and exhalation. At this point you can see that it's not following towards the end. It was not following, and then this graph is messed up. It's not happening. And he said, why? Because I can see that you are inhaling more. So he said, you are inhaling more and you are exhaling more. You are actually very conscious and you are hyperventilating. So you are breathing too much. And I can see that in your graph. It's not relaxed breathing at all. And he said, oh really? I didn't know. Okay, he showed how to do Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama. He also knows yoga. So he showed him how to do Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama. He said, you are not doing it. We all tend to do that. Yes, we can see that in the class also, right?
Yeah.
He was not doing that much, but he was doing a little more than the Sahaja way, right? Be comfortable. You should feel comfortable. You are not feeling comfortable. So I was okay. No, you are not okay. Now try. So now with that new lesson he tried, and they did another 3 minutes of study, and then he asked him to stop and check the whole graph, and it was perfectly fine. And in between there was a phone call that he got, and he showed, everything was fine except this point. And everybody saw that there was a sudden disturbance in that heart rate variability. I said, why? That's the duration. I was watching the graph. That's the duration. I got a call, and the thing suddenly ran, and the phone, and you responded. Somehow your heart, it's totally relaxed and it's following the breath, and suddenly something happened, and I can see that here. So it's a beautiful. That was like eye opener for me. That heart rate variability is such a great indicator for what we are going through. If we hooked up like that, we will learn many things. Biofeedback is becoming a thing of the day now, especially for people who are stressed out. And one other thing, he has EMG, not only EEG, EMG, electromuscular myography. So what he did, he studied Padahastasana for about some 20-30 students. This is Eric Pepper, Dr. Eric Pepper in San Francisco State University. So what he did, he hooked up, he didn't tell them anything. He just said, practice this. So he asked them to bend down and just, practice Padahastasana. And students were doing that. And he measured all of them. And of them, he said some 80, significantly large number of the people do not let go of their neck. So when you do Padahastasana, I always say the crown of the head should start facing the mat. They hold like this. So they do this. Everything is fine except there is a very small, just a little, you won't even know. So this is how they are. And we have to ask them to let go like that. People don't like to let go. So Padahastasana is a great practice. That's why we bring this practice in cyclic meditation where you ask them to let go. So that's the head is the ultimate place where letting go is like, oh my God, what happens to me? I just want to let go of this. So yeah, that's a great way to teach them to let go. See, these are some of the devices and markers that will show you how stressed out you are, how your holding, where you're holding, things like that.
So they use ultrasonography also for that,
Oh, okay.
to measure muscle activity.
Oh.
In a certain muscle, you're doing something, you don't want that muscle to work. They do the ultrasonography to see to show that okay, it's overworking, to relax this side. So it's a way of also improving the mindfulness, right? Awareness
Very
of that
nice.
part.
Yeah, very nice. Ultrasonography. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I had a question. So, when we're talking about the alternate nostril breathing, as yogis, when we claim that left and right nostrils are different, Chandra Nadi, Surya Nadi, right nostril is energizing the sympathetic nervous system, left nostril is parasympathetic nervous system. Is there any validity in terms of evidence-based research on that? I'm curious because I always thought the two nostrils as two different pipes that lead to the same place. So how
Yeah.
come they activate different aspects, left brain, right brain? So
Yeah, there have been at least 2 to 3 attempts by Esvasa, and there are attempts by UC Davis, Dr. Khalsa. Some said contralateral dependence. They tried doing these spatial scores and memory scores. Psychological tests are not that great when it comes to finding the intricate workings of the brain, because many a times these are all self-subjective results, and also none of these tests that are used really have zero learning curve, for example. No, there is a learning effect. You have to cancel the learning effect, and a lot of those confounding factors exist. Some kids are generally better. By the way, these tests were done on children. That's because our brains are so messed up, circadian rhythm wise, or even the thought, the way we are not really pure in the sense of our usage of the mind. So they always do these tests on children, and we also did the same thing. And the tests are also, they work better on children. But unfortunately, even there, a lot of factors, confounding factors. And a couple of them, initially they said contralateral effect, connection between the nostril and the brain. Then they said no, it is ipsilateral, but it's not really very conclusive. So we probably need more sophisticated, maybe fMRI kind of devices to understand
Or
what is
EEG
happening.
or some mapping
EEG and fMRI
while
together.
doing it. It has to be functional. Functional would mean not passive, but while they're doing the activity, that brain activity needs to be measured and then compared.
So there is some work happening, but again the brain also is plastic in the sense although they say left brain does this, right brain does this, that's not really also totally proven, right? In the sense of left brain means the process driven, right brain means
The brain is so adaptive, right? So
yeah,
it
it's
can
very
take over.
adaptive, and there are centers in both hemispheres. So it's not really, there's no real left brain correlates with the right nostril or vice versa. That also has not been
Proven.
established fully. So it's, but what we can really say is that the Swara Yoga, where this whole thing talks, one should probably try and go, instead of connecting to the brain hemispheres, which is what they have been trying to do, instead they should test on those skills, like give them left nostril breathing. Same person who is skilled in the same, in a certain area, give them repeatedly left nostril breathing, and then let them do that activity, right nostril breathing, let them do that activity, and let them repeat that same, one person repeating the same thing, say about 100 times, probably will prove what
There'll
works.
be, so longitudinally there'll be a change in the pattern, and that means that they'll attribute that to that
Something
training
like that.
effect or
Yeah, exactly. So the research has been, I think modern research is very, I again like to call it industry-like thing. There's no out-of-box thing, right? Where you pick a bunch of subjects, a bunch of control, and you have to practice, give a certain molecule to both the groups, and that's not how yoga research should work. It should take this classical text, and we should do research on what the classical text says, as
what the
opposed
claims
to,
are.
yeah. So that is how it should be done. And also, research doesn't have to have control group. I can do research. This is what Dr. Eric Pepper was saying. Very beautifully, he led these children. He said, okay, you want to do effect of left nostril breathing on and right nostril breathing on children, right? Yes. Have you practiced left nostril breathing? And if so, how long? Have you plotted the graph? Have you seen for the next 3 months, can you plot the graph? Your nasal dominance throughout the day, every 10 minutes. Plot the graph. How is it doing? And then practice right nostril breathing and see for about a few days, or maybe alternate day. One day left nostril, one day right nostril, and then plot the graph and see what happens during what time. So have you done your self-research? They said no. Okay. Without that, I wouldn't think you should do any research on yoga, because unless you establish on yourself, there's no point. And research idea will come to you from that inner research you have done. So what you are doing is wrong. And it was such a, I still cannot thank him enough for how he led, actually me, more than children. They listened and they said, who cares? And they just wanted some science research and a science project, and they wanted their thing on the resume, and they're done. But I learned a lot from that.
Even in SVS or Nagarthan, I don't know whether it's legend, people say different things, but they say that initially she gave herself a back pain because there were no patients or anything at that time when she established this. So she would give herself a back pain and then work on it and see what would work to get rid of it.
They have done all kinds of things. I talked about Dr. Nagendra also.
I thought that was impressive because if you don't experience the pain,
Yeah.
How will you treat something?
Yeah. Dr. Nagendra, I talked about this, I don't know where, but Kapalabhati, he was doing half an hour Kapalabhati. He was trying. These things they try on themselves. Okay, so and so says do half an hour Kapalabhati, let me try and see what happens. They are ready to take that risk.
And on one hand, on another hand, sometimes the same person doing research on yourself, how objective can you be? That's all. I mean, it may or may not, but it's still the variability of each individual's personality comes into that picture, right? So sometimes having an objective third person actually do the measurements can take out that bias.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All those depends on what you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if you're a true yogi, there should be no bias.
And this kind of
That's
research
the
is
definition of a
useful
true.
to kind of validate
That's the
your-
goal.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
This kind of research is very useful because then it helps in promoting yoga.
Yeah.
There are always people who say,
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. We'll have a short break and we'll then move on to yoga therapy.